I'm so sorry that we are a little behind schedule today. I like to try to publish on Tuesdays, but I've at a conference this week and I got a little caught up. I wanted to share with you a book from one of my fellow teachers that she was telling me she uses this with her teachers when she teaches teachers. And this book, my copy of it is named George, but the author has actually convinced Scholastic to reprint the book with Melissa's as the title. And I think it's kind of neat to see how even writers, like published writers, not just us, but published writers, feel like their work is never done, even after it's even been printed. So if you're looking for this book now, you might find it under Melissa's Story or George, but Alex Gino is the author, and our main character is named George, but their preferred name is Melissa, and it talks about a girl who feels that they're a girl. They identify as a girl, but was born a boy. So it kind of addresses that. And just for a quick minute, I wanted to share with you about the back of the book and about the author, because they have a frequently asked questions in the back, and it tells us kind of like, how can I talk about trans people and how can I help them? Because we want to make sure that we're inclusive of everybody when we're talking. So we can use things like the singular they. We say, you have a cute shirt. We would say they have a cute shirt. It's the same. You would use the same pronouns and verb pairings as if you were using the word you. So I'm just going to jump right in and share the first chapter here so we can make sure that we get started. Chapter 1, Secrets. George pulled the silver house key out of the smallest pocket of a large red backpack. Mom had sewn the key in so that it wouldn't get lost, but the yarn wasn't quite long enough to reach the keyhole if the bag rested on the ground. Instead, George had to steady herself awkwardly on one foot while the backpack rested on her other knee. She wiggled the key until it locked into place. Stumbling inside, she called out, "Hello?" No lights were on. Still, George needed to be certain the house was empty. The door of Mom's room was open and the bed sheets were flat. Scott's room was unoccupied as well. Sure that she was alone, George went into the third bedroom, opened the closet door, and surveyed the pile of stuffed animals and assorted toys inside. They were undisturbed. Mom complained that George hadn't played with any of the toys in years and said that they should be donated to needy families. But George knew that they were needed here to guard her most prized and secret collection. Fishing beneath the teddy bears and fluffy bunnies, George felt for a flat denim bag. Once she had it in hand, she ran to the bathroom, shut the door, and turned the lock. Clutching the bag in tightly wrapped arms, George slid to the ground. As she tipped the denim bag on its side, the silky, slippery pages of a dozen magazines fell out onto the tiled bathroom floor. Covers promised how to have perfect skin, 12 fresh summer haircuts, how to tell a hottie you like him, and wild winter wardrobes. George was only a few years younger than the girls smiling at her from the glossy pages. She thought of them as her friends. George picked up an issue from last April that she'd looked through countless times before. She browsed the busy pages with a crisp flip, flip, flip that stirred up the faint smell of paper. She paused on a photo of 4 girls at the beach. They modeled swimsuits in a line, each striking a pose. A guide on the right-hand side of the page recommended various styles based on body type. The bodies looked the same to George. They were all girls' bodies. On the next page, 2 girls sat laughing on a blanket, their arms around each other's shoulders. One wore a striped bikini. The other wore a polka dot one-piece with cutouts at the hips. If George were there, she would fit right in, giggling and linking her arms in theirs. She would wear a bright pink bikini, and she would have long hair that her new friends would love to braid. They would ask her name, and she would tell them, "My name is Melissa." Melissa was the name she called herself in the mirror when no one was watching, and she could brush her flat, reddish-brown hair to the front of her head, as if she had bangs. George flipped past flashy ads for book bag organizers, nail polish, the latest phones, even tampons. She skipped over an article on how to make your own bracelets and another on advice for talking to boys. George's magazine collection had started by accident. 2 summers ago, she had noticed an old issue of Girl's Life in the recycling bin at the library. The word girl had caught her eye instantly, and she had slipped the magazine in her jacket to look at later. Another girls' magazine soon followed, this time rescued from a trash can down the block from her house. The very next weekend, she had found the denim bag at a yard sale for $0.25. It was just the size of a magazine, and it had a zipper along the top. It was as if the universe had wanted her to be able to store her collection safely. George settled on a 2-page spread about framing your face with makeup. George had never worn makeup, but she pored over the range of colors on the left side of the page. Her heart raced in her chest. She wondered what it would feel like to really wear lipstick. George loved to put on chapstick. She used it all winter, whether or not her lips were really chapped, and every spring she hid the tube for Mom and wore it until it ran out. George jumped when she heard a clatter outside. She looked out the window to the front door directly below. No one was in sight, but Scott's bike lay in the driveway, the back wheel still spinning. Scott's bike? That meant Scott. Scott was George's oldest brother, a high school freshman. The hair on George's neck stood up. Soon, heavy footsteps climbed the stairs to the second floor. The locked bathroom door rattled. It was as if Scott were rattling George's heart inside her ribcage. Bang, bang, bang! You in there, George? Yeah. The shiny magazines were spread across the tile floor. She gathered them into a pile and stuffed them into the denim bag. Her heart was thumping almost as loudly as Scott's foot against the door. Yo, bro, I gotta go, Scott yelled from the other side. George zipped up the bag as quietly as she could and looked for a place to stash it. She couldn't walk out with it. Scott would want to know what was inside. The bathroom's one cabinet was stuffed with towels and didn't shut all the way. No good either. Finally, she hung the bag from the shower head and closed the curtain, desperately hoping this wouldn't be the moment that Scott discovered personal hygiene. Scott rushed in as soon as George opened the door, unzipping his jeans before he reached the toilet. George exited quickly, closing the door and leaning on the wall outside to catch her breath. The bag was probably still swinging in the shower. George hoped it wouldn't hit against the curtain, or worse, fall and land in the bathtub with a thud. George didn't want to be standing near the bathroom when Scott came out, so she went down to the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of orange juice and sat at the table, her skin tingling. Outside, a cloud passed overhead and the room grew darker. When the bathroom door banged open, George jumped in her seat, splashing juice on her hand. She realized that she had been barely breathing. Thump, 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 thump. Scott tromped downstairs, a DVD case in his hand. He opened the refrigerator door, pulled out the carton of orange juice, and took a long swig. He wore a thin black t-shirt and jeans with a small hole in the knee. He hadn't gotten a haircut in months, and dark brown curls formed a mop on his head. Sorry if I busted in on you while you were taking a dump. Scott wiped the juice off his lips with his bare forearm. I wasn't taking a dump, George says. Then what took you so long? George hesitated. Oh, I know, Scott said. I'll bet you had a magazine in there. George froze, her mouth half open and her brain mid-thought. The air felt warm and her mind swirled. She put her hands on the table to make sure she was still there. That's it, Scott grinned, oblivious to George's panic. That's my little bro, growing up and looking at dirty magazines. Oh, George said out loud. She knew what dirty magazines were. She almost laughed. The girls in the magazines she was looking at wore a lot more clothes than that, even the ones at the beach. George relaxed at least a little. Don't worry, George. I don't tell Mom. Anyway, I'm heading back out. Just had to get this. Scott shook the plastic box he held in his hand and the DVD inside rattled. Haven't even seen it yet, but it's supposed to be a classic. It's German. The title means something like The Blood of Evil. When the zombies gnaw this one guy's arm off and kill him, the other guy has to use the gnawed-off arm of his dead best friend to fight the zombies. It's awesome. It sounds gross, George said. It is, Scott nodded enthusiastically. He took another gulp of orange juice, put the carton back into the fridge, and headed for the door. I'll let you get back to thinking about girls, Scott joked on the way out. George dashed up to the bathroom, rescued her bag, and buried it deep in her closet, under the toys and stuffed animals. She put a pile of dirty clothes on top, just in case. Then she closed the door and collapsed face first into her bed, her hands crossing over her head, pressing her elbows to her ears and wishing she were someone else, anyone else. So that's our first chapter. This was a quick read for me, maybe about an hour. It's a total of like 195 pages for this story, and then there's some comments and then interview with the author, who is non-binary, which means they don't identify necessarily as male or female, but they just kind of, hang, and they cool. So George is the first novel, or Melissa's story, or whatever it happens to be by the time we get to this, if we need to make another change. But you can learn more about Alex at alexgino.com, which is the author of the book, and you can also get the book. But these boys and girls, George is a fourth grade student, and throughout the story, he's supposed to participate in a play. The class is doing the play of Charlotte's Web, and all the people who present as boys are supposed to represent boys in the play, and vice versa. And George's best friend is a girl named Callie, and Callie gets the lead part of Charlotte, which breaks George's heart because she wants to play Charlotte. And she really feels like if she gets the role of Charlotte, then her mom is finally going to see her as her and not as George, and that this is really going to help her. And so they kind of go through the process of who gets what part and how does George make the transition from George to everyone to Melissa to everyone. It doesn't follow the whole transition. It just kind of hits on that one little snippet for George as she becomes Melissa, but it's a good read, and it's not super in-depth, but kind of gives a good glimpse into what it's like if you are identifying as a different gender, but you're scared of how other people will react and things like that. And so I really want to give a shout out to the principal in the story, who kind of represents people who are accepting and making that a safe space and helping make their school a safe space. And I know that sometimes there just aren't enough safe spaces. And I think that George should hear Green Day's King for a Day. Green Day's King for a Day talks about a boy who likes to dress up in drag, and his dad tries to take him to counseling because he thinks he's not good enough, he's not man enough. And those are some of the things that George, as George, finds herself struggling with. So this is the song that I would play for George in this early transitional play. So I will leave the YouTube link down below in the comments, and I hope you enjoyed our story for George. Next week, we will have No Fixed Address by Susan Nielsen, I think.